I am a biologist and former science publisher, and my work as an environmental artist reflects that environment seen through the eyes of an artist and a scientist. My work is research-based and interdisciplinary. I often collaborate with subject specialists who give me a lot more depth and guidance. My most recent area of research and practice is soil, the Earth's surface. And what I'm going to share with you today crosses boundaries between art, archaeology, soil science, and agriculture. My creative outcomes include soil paintings, growing crops, building a structure, and writing a narrative text. Now, though the facts of transhumance in the Weald of southern England lack sound evidence, it is clear that there was deep and broad integration of Saxon life with the existing ecosystem. Transhumance is a type of rural nomadic pastoralism where livestock is moved from one grazing area to another more remote area in a seasonal cycle. In the 21st century, perhaps we're most familiar with alpine herders who move cattle to upland meadows in the summer. Discussions with landscape archaeologist Chris Webb in Selborne, Hampshire, alerted me to the fact that local farmers practiced transhumance in the Saxon era. In spring, livestock were herded from the valuable agricultural soils to the less fertile woodland pastures, returning in the autumn. In the meantime, higher value crops, oats, barley, wheat, were cultivated from the more fertile soil. Transhumance was a major commitment. So my first research question was, why did they do it? In these maps, bottom right, for those of us who don't always know exactly where the Weald is, shows us the Weald, and the little red box identifies more or less where Selborne, my site, was. The underlying geology provides an important step in answering the question, why did they do it? The Weald and it is shown here, and 6 different Selborne locations with different types of soil on them. So I started by collecting these 6 soils. You can see the soil samples here, and you can see the variety of pigments that are already visible. I then ground them up with a pestle and mortar and made them into a stable, adhesive painting pigment. As a result, I produced a series of paintings, all based on soil, which you can see 2 images of here. Already you can see the range of colours and textures. It was an exciting start. Pre-Christian Anglo-Saxon farmers, so we're talking about 400 to 700 CE, provide a valuable alternative method of living within limits. They existed entirely on what they could make or grow. Living within limits is a pressing central question for global cultures who really have few or no limits on consumption, or have done. Transhumance gives us clues on how Saxons lived within limits. They had no choice. So I started growing things. And I used an ancient grain. I used spelt, which had been introduced by the Romans to Britain and was almost certainly used by the Saxons. I planted 30 seeds of spelt in each of the pure samples of soils. You can see the layout in the middle. It's identical on either side. And then I watered them and gave them exactly the same light. So what happened? Well, here you can see the results after a period of time. And already by day 14, there's a fairly stark contrast between the growth in these different pots. The most healthy growth appears to be in the green sand, that's third from the right, and the least well in the Folkestone sand, which is on the extreme right, which was the soil from what would have been the summer woodland pastures. Saxon farmers no doubt made and handed down these direct observations, and my growing experiment simply compressed a lot of that evidence. It plainly makes sense to use the most fertile soils for summer cultivation to yield the best crops and to move livestock to poorer soils where there would still be grazing. Saxon farmers were highly effective at living off and live with the land. My next research question was, given this commitment, what was life like as a herder? There's very scant information on what actually took place. There simply are remnants of what might be pens and buildings, and within the Weald there are networks of sunken lanes from the better arable lands to the poorer woodland areas. Once the transit was made with livestock, which is not a simple task for anyone who's tried to herd sheep or even cattle, often women and girls did this herding. They then had to establish themselves in the woodland pasture for the summer. Dr. Andy Margetts at the Institute of Archaeology at University College London provided helpful background, and I quote, "The summer huts were probably of timber, 3 to 4 meters, with a bed, a hearth, a few belongings, most likely of horn, leather, and wood. The roof may have been thatched over posts of timber with wattle and daub walls. So I set about making this reduced scale summer structure. I removed turf to provide a sunken base that was quite common for the Saxons. It was called a gruben house, pit house literally, and then put vertical posts and wove wattle walls. This is the completed form. I called it kreisförmig Grubenhaus, which is German, kreisförmig meaning circular. Theirs was almost certainly rectangular, and Grubenhaus, pit house, referencing the Germanic roots of Saxon cultures that they brought with them. The construction proved challenging and informative. It was hard physical work and required more materials and effort than I expected. I kept trailing off to get more. As with all aspects of this research, I developed a deeper respect for the Saxon culture that was of necessity mobile, frugal, and brave. And finally, making this small scale structure and growing and dealing with the soil fed into some writing, which is entitled Shealing in 650 CE. Shealing is a word used in Scotland, but it's used to describe summering or going to a summer hut. This narrative, which is fictional, relates possible experiences of a young woman taking livestock to poorer grazing soils during the summer. The link on screen is to my blog post that includes me reading the short narrative. If you just want to hear the narrative, you can pop into YouTube and there's a link there. So what next for me? Well, research in the field, which really is my studio, and the library continues, because I am very captivated by this statement from Wendell Berry, that the soil of any one place makes its own peculiar and inevitable sense. It is impossible to contemplate the life of the soil for very long without seeing it as analogous to the life of the spirit. The work is ongoing. Do contact me if you'd like to know more. I would love to hear from you. Thank you very much for listening.